Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on document automation, where we're going to explore the whys, the hows, the wheres, the whens, anything you might want to know about document automation. Now, this webinar has been hosted and run by the UK Legal Tech Association. If you're unfamiliar with the association, do check them out online. They are the organisation that really is about a community to bring legal professionals, technology providers and consumers of legal services together to help shape the future of legal services collaboratively. So great to have you here with us today. If you haven't been in an Arken webinar before, or any other webinar that uses the GoToMeeting framework, then on the right hand side you'll see a control panel. And we welcome your involvement in that. All you need to do there is to use the chat function. You can ask questions. We're definitely going to try and run through to have some time at the end of the session, at the webinar, to answer any of those questions that you might have. My name is Dave Newick. I'm the Managing Director of Arken.legal. And I'm joined here today by currently 2 solicitors, but about to become 3 solicitors. So as we go around, we're going to start to get everyone to introduce themselves. Just before we do that though, a little quick introduction of myself. I'm the Managing Director of Arken.legal. Arken.legal is one of the pioneers of legal tech in the UK, particularly document automation. In fact, we bought the first document automation product to market in 1992, then followed that up with the first online will system in 2009. So since then, we've been producing document automation systems all around the world with a particular focus on estate planning. Today, all of our products are in the cloud, and we have now a full range of products for document automation and business efficiency, including digital fact finds and a whole range of other things to try and deliver efficiency to law firms, accountants, anybody who is involved in private client law, really. So I'm joined here today by Sophie Yates from Fodens. Sophie, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Dave.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and yourself.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sophie Yates. As Dave explained, I'm from a practice in Shropshire called Fodens Solicitors, and we recently onboarded with Arken, and obviously I'll tell you more about that as we go on during this session today.
Wonderful, thank you. Alex, welcome to you.
Hey Dave. So I'm Alex Hamilton. I'm the CEO and founder of Radiant Law. We specialize in commercial contracts, helping large companies with their day-to-day contracts. I'm currently in Cape Town, where we support our clients from, but we're an English law firm, and we use document automation. And well, the basic rule at Radiant is you're not allowed to create a contract by hand. So we use it across all our clients.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're very jealous. Alex showed us around the outside of his office before, and the sun was shining and it looked fantastic. So yes, I'm sure he's going to be going out into a nice long summer's evening before very long. Giles, welcome to you. Can't hear you, I'm afraid, Giles. You might be on mute, or you might have a trouble with your microphone.
How's that now? Is that any better?
Hey, there we go. Yes, we've got you now. Loud and clear.
Yeah, very jealous of you, Alex. No, so yeah, my name is Giles Thompson. I'm calling from Avoca, which is a document automation startup. And yes, I mean our ethos is similar to Alex in a sense. We don't like people doing things manually. We want to automate document creation and make it easy. I'll be talking from the perspective of sort of a startup which helps with document automation today. My role is head of growth, which encompasses lots of different things.
Fantastic. Well, as you can see, we've got a wide variety of people here who have different experiences within the document automation realm. What I would say is that the roles that we're all carrying out here today are that I'm going to be the moderator, the convener, the chair of the discussion. So my task is to keep the 3 wonderful lawyers that we have here from talking for too long and to keep them to task. So we're very much looking forward to everyone contributing to the subject. Now, Giles, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay, to really give us a brief explanation in and around what document automation actually is and what you think can be automated in terms of documentation.
Okay, well, I'm gonna keep it super simple, and I'm aware that there are some people on the call who know, lots about this subject matter. So I apologise to all of you in advance. But essentially, document automation is the ability to take a document, usually a precedent contract or some sort of standard form document, and then to take that document, identify all the elements of that document which you might want to make custom or make bespoke, and then once you've identified those areas, to sort of create a questionnaire through which you can obtain the information that you need to customize that document and make it bespoke appropriately. So essentially what it does is it gives you the ability to, by answering a questionnaire in seconds, to draft a fully formed bespoke contract. That's the aim, and I hope that's a relatively clear explanation. There are various ways that you can achieve that, various software tools. Voca is only one of them, and there are various different approaches you can take. Well, what can be automated? As I say, it's much easier to do it with a standard form document or precedent, because when you're identifying the information that you want to make bespoke or custom, all you're doing is identifying the areas which are in square brackets, and that can be things like the party names, so placeholder information which drops in, either manually or via questionnaire, such as such as a name. So anything that basically goes in verbatim or unadulterated, and then the other elements that you might want to automate as well, such as conditional drafting. So, for example, in an employment agreement, you might want to drop in the probation period drafting, depending on whether you've negotiated that commercially or not. So really, the world is your oyster in terms of what you can automate. You can take a previous deal document and add automation in and kind of create your own new square brackets. But it's easier if you already have a really good document suite of precedents that your commercial negotiators or your lawyers fill out the square bracket information in for as a matter of routine already. Some of the easiest things to automate are NDAs, just because there's so few square brackets in them. Some of the hardest things are sort of facility agreements for loans or share purchase agreements and that kind of thing. But actually, there are some shorter documents which are often a little bit more tricky to automate too. So, for example, I use the example of an employment agreement. Where you've got a high paid executive with lots of complicated remuneration, that can actually be quite tricky to identify the elements which you might want to make bespoke or conditional. So I hope that answers your question, Dave.
Oh, I think that's excellent. Yeah. Have you got anything to add to that, Alex? Got a couple of minutes. Just on mute there.
On mute, Alex, I think.
Yeah. So I think we're all going to be coming at this from slightly different perspectives, and it's worth drawing that out. That we basically act like an in-house team for our clients, and I think in-house have their perspective, law firms have a different perspective, probably a different level of complexity, and then you've got kind of where Sophie's coming from is more kind of, I think, B2C, of how can you put a tool in the hands of a customer on the high street to go and create their wills in that case. So all quite different use cases, all going to have and only different perspectives on it. But just thinking about, kind of looking at it from the perspective of an in-house team and why you would automate stuff, right? Like I started with, we automate everything, right? So the kind of the golden rule is don't do it by hand. Why is that? Well, first of all, speed. So it's always a mess, right? The normal traditional way, even if you have a precedent as opposed to pulling one off the shelf that you did last time, handling square brackets, going through it and thinking through all the consequences of the changes you make is slow, and document automation experience should be literally a matter of minutes, right? So 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes, that's all it should be to generate something especially if you know your way around it. So speed is a big deal. The second is accuracy. You know, if you are working with a precedent, you will make mistakes. You know, to err is human, right? And it is fundamentally problematic. And there's a kind of another aspect to that, which is rigor. So, you know, if you kind of read the checklist manifesto and what have you, there's kind of a strong realization coming through, perhaps late to law, that we're actually pretty inconsistent and we regularly forget things. So what's nice about a document automation system is it forces you through a series of questions, and it's going to force you to deal with a topic which you might otherwise forget about. And it's particularly important, you know, when you compare it to a use case like Matt said, you know, pulling off a contract you did last time. Well, why is that particular clause in there, right? What got taken out last time that you know would have been in the precedent? So it's super dangerous. So speed, accuracy, and rigor. Next one is our contracts are too damn long, right? I mean, you know, I know the legal industry has a lot to blame for this, but we seem to just keep getting longer and longer terms. And you know, kind of a heart of where Radiant's coming from is that's, you know, pretty broken, the contracting process. And I don't think it's been helped by a mindset which is we better cover that point just in case. So what you really want is to have a contract that's actually tailored for that specific deal, where you can safely delete stuff and just not put it in because it ain't relevant, right? You know, that kind of embarrassment when you send a draft out and the other side's, well, what's this clause about? And you're kind of, you know, well, I guess it doesn't really apply here, right? So shorter contracts the place to go. The next one is, if you can get this, especially from an in-house perspective, into the hands of your business, and I imagine it's similar with Sophie and getting it into the hands of the end user, they are a lot happier, right? It is a lot actual better experience answering some questions and getting a document immediately, as opposed to answering some random questions and then someone coming back and asking you another set of questions and then another thing, and can we just check this point and all the rest of it, right? It's a pretty horrific experience. So much happier. And then the final point for the advantages is, especially when you're thinking about kind of, you know, in-house teams and so on, is it's a problem to ensure that you can update your templates, right? Because the classic problem is that you go through in-house for some reason, it always takes 6 months to update their contracts, right? It's kind of the mindset. So if what they're worried about after they've kind of drafted this kind of agreement is they can't really make a change to it because they have the distribution problem. They don't trust that everyone's going to go and use the latest version. They don't want lots of versions bouncing around. And it's a real problem that actually slows things down, which is why they kind of then do massive projects with, you know, 6 months worth of changes, as opposed to what they should be doing, which is changing it every month, right? Your terms should be constantly being updated with, this point came up in negotiation. If we reworded it slightly differently, then we could get rid of that problem. We'd stop talking about it. It's boring. So document automation actually offers the great advantage of forcing everyone to go to one place to create the terms, which means that you can update the terms knowing that everyone's going to use the latest version. And that's super valuable when you're actually trying to get traction on the bigger problem of how do we accelerate our contracting. A couple of things on the downsides. One is I think people can get stuck over too many options, it's too complex and so on. And it's quite easy to come at this topic of you either got to nail every single permutation or bust. We highly recommend the Pareto principle. You know, 80% of the benefit comes from 20% of the changes. You know, the first 10 changes are the most important, and it's okay to update the contract afterwards with exceptions rather than dealing with it. So, you know, you can have an approach of, you know, maybe not with wills, but, or maybe you can with wills, but in, you know, more complex contracts, so at least get the structure right, roughly right, work from there. And then the other, which we'll come on to, is there are technical skills required in doing automation, and however easy we make it, I think there are challenges in actually implementing this in practice.
Well said. Sophie, your firm and yourself personally, you've started the document automation journey. What's your experience of, and what would your comment be to what Alex has suggested there?
Well, as Alex said, I'm looking at it from a you know, I suppose a traditional law firm state of play, and from my point of view, we've come to it far too late. I cannot believe, you know, the number of times that Arken and other products have sat in my inbox waiting for me to view, waiting for me to trial, and I've just been too busy to do it. You know, we know alone, just on looking at the cost comparison from last 12 months before we implemented the use of automation for will drafting and powers of attorney within the private client sphere, that we've saved huge thousands and thousands of pounds worth of money, literally just on the cost of the product, not even taking into account time that you know, has been wasted. When you look at the time element, you know, one of the massive advantages, the standard stuff as you'd expect, that, you know, as Alex has said as well, you know, for us it's the same from a supervision aspect, from a compliance aspect. It's key for, you know, busy either heads of department or those in supervising roles. It's easier to just do it yourself sometimes. Well, actually, with an automation process, it doesn't need to be like that. You don't need to be, I don't need to be drafting a simple will that's going to bring in, you know, a couple of £100 when another member of my team could be doing that. So from a supervisory capacity, it's just unbelievable what automation brings to the table. We've all had, sorry to say, you know, colleagues who have always done certain things in a certain way, and the last time their precedents were updated, who knows when, they've got it in a Word template somewhere, and that's fine, and that hits the button and we'll just use that. It's just makes me sick to my stomach at the thought of, you know, the problems that can cause. Hopefully with the use of products such as Arken, you know, that's not the case, that our World Bank will be sat there with that level of worry. We've had a great, I think one of the concerns can be how team members, you know, want to run with something. And we've got, at Foden's, we do a lot with trainee members and younger members of the team, new qualifieds. And, you know, thinking of the downsides of what we face with Arken, okay, you know, on occasion, or automation generally, is that you can fall in the trap of those who are training actually missing the point as to what a certain, you know, do I include this clause? Right. Do I tick this box? What does that actually mean? However, with the right programs, that's easily overcome, because questions are answered within drafting. That actually they, as Alex said, things aren't missed. Whereas actually, if there's an old precedent in a, you know, written Word template, or heaven forbid, whatever it may be, actually there's the risk that that's just taken out because somebody doesn't understand it. Whereas actually, if they've got to deal with something head on, they've got to address, what does that mean? Is it relevant for my client? Is it relevant for this matter? From a client perspective, you know, as firms of solicitors, we're all too comfortable in the way we do things, and fortunately we won't be around if we continue to act like that. So we've got to change, you know, we've got to make things easier for the client. I wouldn't be grateful if a big wad of paper landed on my doorstep. When I'd asked over a week ago, you know, I'd spoken to somebody, had a meeting with them. It's all just too difficult to go through that process. There are some clients out there who need that service, but there's clients who need different levels of service and different ways of accessing. So as Alex says, you know, the fact that people can put in their information, they put it in themselves, so wrong names, embarrassments over silly typos and things like that, a lot of it can be alleviated by the clients doing part of the work as well, and it's helpful from a cost perspective. So
yeah, look, I think that's really true, isn't it? And certainly when you look at the question of risk that is posed by not having automation, and by having a lot of manual processes and different precedents, particularly when you get into multi-office scenarios and or larger firms, I think that is exacerbated. And there's a lot of consideration that really should be given, not just to precedents, but to actually to the advice and the structure and what has been given to different clients in similar circumstances. Is there consistency? So what is the customer experience, and how much risk is there of something being challenged based on you know, a range of different circumstances, you know, which have contributed to a problem. Charles, I'll come to you now. Now, we've been talking about some of the benefits and why to look at document automation. What about the question of when? When do you think we should start to think about implementing it? When should individual practices, organizations kind of know that now is the right time?
Okay, well, I'll tell you how you know it's too late. So that's when you feel the blood drain from your face when you see a particular piece of work come in. So, for example, one of the clients that I've worked with, they didn't have this feeling. They had sort of some work come in related to the pandemic where they had to send out 4,000 employment settlements agreements, which was obviously a pretty depressing thing to have to do. But what was even more depressing was the fact that they would, unless they were using document automation, they were going to have to fill out each one of those 4,000 agreements manually, because
Wow.
they had, those agreements were all new, and they referenced the new coronavirus regulations and and all of that kind of thing. So if you've got a big task where you think, gosh, this would be easy if I could do this autonomously, or fill in this information in this basic information in a more straightforward way, but I've got a pressing deadline, so I don't have time to get up to speed with document automation, that's when you've left it too late. So I would actually argue that document automation should be a skill that every not just lawyer or legal services provider, but every salesperson, procurement person, frankly every commercial person should have at their disposal, in the same way that they know when to outsource something and when it makes sense for somebody else to do a particular piece of work, or when to delegate a piece of work. They know when they should use document automation to deliver a particular task in a more either cost-effective way for their client, or in a way which means that they get to see their family and don't have to stay up all night.
Yes.
So I would say the right time to do it is now, and tools like ours, but we're not the only tool available, offer sort of training on how to do document automation, and thankfully there's lots of consumer tools out there, or consumer focused tools out there now, which anybody can use. And actually, if you're a client of a law firm already, demand the law firm is using these kind of products, because it's going to make things cheaper for you.
Yeah, it's quite true, isn't it? And just touching on the time element there, I think one of the things that's been really true to me out of the back of COVID is that everyone values time differently now. And so when you start to look at the efficiencies that you can get, what you can actually do with your time, because you're that much more appreciative of the time that you then have with, to do whatever you want to do with loved ones or whatever, then it's one of those things that starts to become more real and more personal, doesn't it? Alex, what would you add to that?
Well, looking again from the in-house perspective, I think that you need a sensible order in which you fix your contracting, and we call it, we have a three-stage thing, right? Repeatable, robots, and refinement. So the basic premise is you got to have a process and the right terms and so on in place first before you start throwing automation at it, and then you're into a continuous improvement cycle. So the starting point, I think, is get your templates in order. And there's no point automating, long guff, right? So, start with short, clear, reasonable, relevant contracts, and then automate those when you've done it. But short, clear, reasonable, relevant contracts shouldn't take 6 months to do, right? You can do that in a week. You can do that in 2 weeks, a bottle of wine and a quill, and you're going, right? So, and as soon as you've done that, you should be automating your contracts as soon as possible, right? And you can put, there are plenty of systems, as Charles pointed out, like Avocas and others as well, we can touch on, to get that going. And I think that one of the problems we have is everyone gets frozen on the perfect system, and there's this kind of, it's very easy to spin into a never-ending discussion of what system to use and so on. There isn't a perfect answer. You can have more end-to-end systems, or you can have more point solutions. But the thing to bear in mind is the hard bit with automation is the thinking bit, right? It's the actually figuring out, if you got to, turn this language on in these circumstances, this is the question, so on to ask, right? It's not impossible. Anyone can do it. It just makes your brain hurt a little bit because you actually have to think it through, and probably at more rigor than you might be used to. The interesting thing is that once you've gone through that, even if you decide later on that you've put the wrong system in place, it's okay, because actually migrating stuff between systems is not that big a deal. I mean, it's work because you have to do the mechanical of automation, but you've already done the hard work of figuring out, you know, the permutations and how it works, right? Which is actually the really hard bit, and that is totally portable across to any given system. It's much faster to, you know, create something in a new system, having seen an example of, you know, how it was done before, than do it from scratch. So, you know, kind of emphasis on now, do it now.
Yes. Sophie, look, you've obviously been through this process. You've implemented document automation. So, what's your view on the when, and also sort of segueing into where do you get started?
Yeah, absolutely. The when is it, you know, it has to happen yesterday as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, I'm a perfect living example of the person who's put it off and just not looked at it. And gosh, you know, the hours I could have spent away from the office or away from my computer at home as the rest of my team, and quite frankly doing better things, you know, had we implemented something like this sooner. And then it gives you the, so I think, you know, where do you start with all of this? It can be a minefield, and I think a lot of it is down to the type of practice that you're working in, the type of firm that you're with, who's around you. You know, you can have real vibrant members of the team who really are keen for change, and are happy to help you look into what projects are out there, what's around. Speak to some of the market leaders, find out what's there. It's really easy to do. It's not onerous. A quick search will tell you, you know, surprisingly what you're looking for. And actually, once you start to have those conversations, those who are market leaders know all about it. They'll tell you all you need to know and more. So it's not anything that should be too onerous. It's really easy. You know, we all know how to use a website. Let's look up the stuff, speak to somebody, and get going with it. It might be that you know, a larger law firm, for example, it's department by department. You know, certainly, for example, in my scenario, we were already a practice that had a strong property team. They had their practices and procedures in place. I'm not looking at theirs, that's run by somebody else. Yes, it interests me as a director of the practice, but I trusted my colleagues that, you know, they've got the right systems there. I'm worrying about the work that I do and the work that my team directly does. So that's hence why, from my experience, it's very specialist to the work that I do in the wills and the power of attorney software. But now that we've run that for the last 7 months, we're now thinking, right, what can we do on a bigger scale? So don't think, oh my goodness, overnight we're going from this lovely, you know, paper file, and I'll come on to that in a moment, this lovely paper file that I've got on my desk, and all of a sudden the whole practice has got to change overnight into the way that we do things. Absolutely not. It's amazing what products speak to one another as well, and you know, it's just to explore that. And I think as well, it's implementing automation within your practice that suits the way your team work. So just because you have automation, there may be some members of the team that, you know, dare I say it, for now do like a little bit of paper, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that everything is going to live on that screen and it's never coming out. It's just about making it work for the practice, and you know, the market leaders will tell you about how that can be implemented. They're the ones with the experience.
Yeah, look, that's so true, isn't it? Absolutely. And I think what we see most often is that the reason that a lot of firms don't get started is because, to echo what you both said there, is that they make the decision too big. Because in the cultural landscape of particularly law firms, you're going to always have the people who don't want to change. And there's always going to be those people that want to take anything that looks like change to a quiet corner and strangle the hell out of it. So, sorry for the description there, but you always get that section of the legal community that want to do that. So don't start there first. Don't expect that you're going to get those people across the line. Start with the people who actually are very keen to adopt and want to work in a really time-efficient way. Prove the case, prove the point, and then start to proliferate through the rest of the organization. Giles, look, we've been talking about a range of different things, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts in and around what's just been discussed as well. But if we start thinking about who and how you'd start to get this underway. What's your experience with your firm Avoca in that process?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, very happy to answer the who question. I'm just going to very quickly just comment on a couple of things that were said, if that's all right, very quickly.
Yeah.
I promise I won't get us behind time, but I think I would completely agree with what Alex is saying about, you know, analyzing the sort of contractual mechanics. You can make the technical aspect of using these tools easy, but actually you need the experience and the brains to be able to figure out what the contractual mechanics are to actually do that process. Completely agree, and that's not something that, you know, a tech provider can help you with. You need to think about that or take legal advice. Also think that, you know, agree about the sort of need for ad hoc wins as well. You know, you don't need to make it into a massive project. You don't need to automate every single precedent to start with. Try with the ones which give you the biggest pain to start with. And actually picking on another thing you said, Alex, as well, about just picking a tool, running with it, and not being too worried about switching down the line. Actually, providers like us, we realize that a lot of people have existing tools in place, and we realize in order to win customers, we need to help people find an automated way to actually convert their templates to our platform. So, you know, put it on providers if you do want to switch to convert your templates for you, rather than you having to redo the work. The other thing I would say, and this relates more to the who, and this is you know, relating to some of the stuff you said, Sophie, around, you know, some people just don't like using new things, and we have to accept that as a tech provider. One thing I would say is you have to make sure your system, as closely as possible, that you're implementing echoes what people already do. So make sure that the way that people save documents, amend them, sort of echoes the existing, you know, way that things are configured, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all about sort of meeting people where they are, and also, you know, try and find a system which allows people to opt out as well at certain points. You know, you don't need to necessarily automate the whole process. Let them automate 80% and then opt out and start using a Word document as they usually would, for instance. And I think I can sort of segue that into the who by saying, you know, absolutely agree with Sophie. You know, contact the people who, you know, are the vibrant people who want to bring about change, but also the people who, you know, are having those biggest problems that are most immediately remediable as well. You know, what part of the reason I think I was hired at Avoca as a lawyer is because, you know, that does not qualify me to tell lawyers how to do their job, but what it does help me do is understand the pain that lawyers go through, and potentially some, you know, when COVID happened, I thought, my goodness, there's going to be lots of employment lawyers who are absolutely freaking out right now. Why don't I reach out to them? And I think that, you know, yeah, finding the people who have the most immediate problem is a really helpful way to go. And also, a lot of law firms now have sort of innovation leads, so they're a really good person to speak to. But, you know, there's no hard and fast rule. You know, you can be the head of sales, the head of procurement, just, you know, a member of legal counsel who sort of wants to run with a project. It doesn't matter who does it, but it has to be someone who is sort of empowered within the organization. But I would really like to hear Alex and Sophie's opinion as well.
Yeah, Alex, coming to you, what are your thoughts on that?
So there's kind of this mythical creature, the technical lawyer, and you know, and I think a lot of suppliers have kind of targeted this ideal, right, of, okay, well, we'll have a, you know, a lawyer, and we'll make editing so easy, it's just like Word, and you can, you know, make these changes easily. And, you know, I taught myself to use document automation 10 years ago, back in the day, and so on. So it happens, but I'm not bloody doing it now, I can tell you. And I think that's kind of part of, we have to accept the reality of this, that the people who, in order to make this really work, you need to have people who are actually going to be able to dedicate a serious amount of time to working on the documents and tweaking them. And it's not a one-shot job. You're going to get it up there with a good enough, you know, for government work kind of approach, and then keep iterating through and adding options and so on. And so it's an ongoing process. And so I think if you're serious about this, you need someone who is going to be available to keep making changes, and who's going to do the heavy lifting on developing the templates themselves. And they need to work with the lawyer, the legal expert that Giles was talking about. Now, the problem with the legal experts is that they have, generally speaking, no idea what real rigor is, right? Because if you know anything about programming, and you don't have to, but if you did, you'd realize that there's a whole bloody long way from business principles to code. And computers are incredibly stupid, and you got to kind of figure it all out, right? So that piece is hard too. And it's very easy for people who love the idea of this to become a little bit hand wavy about the exact details of exactly what gets switched on and what doesn't. And can't we just apply that change all the way through, right? And so on, which is rather unhelpful. So you kind of, to make it work, I think that if you can find someone who knows all the law, willing to pick up a system and work on it, and who has the capacity to keep working on it, well done. Good luck finding them, but if you've done, well done. But the rest of us, what we basically need is you need people with rigor who understand the area, not just enthusiastic, right? And in fact, you might find that the most enthusiastic people tend to be the worst at this because they kind of like shiny new toys, which is actually not a good indicator of rigor. And then you need them to work with a user-friendly, more technical person, which can be within your firm, it can be within your company, but let's face it, in-house doesn't actually have this spare capacity usually, or it can be an external provider. So we do this for people, but Giles would Voca does it, and I'm sure Dave, your organization helps too. So you're kind of trying to bring that together into one package on a sustainable basis.
Fantastic. Sophie, what are your views there, particularly with relevance to looking at, say, external providers that you referenced before, and how you make a decision around which sort of provider and what sort of solution is appropriate for your unique needs as an organization?
I think it's all too easy to get bogged down. We, as lawyers, what we do is we like to cover all bases and make sure that everything is always somebody else's fault. It's never going to be our own because we've covered our backs, and it's the client's fault because they didn't tell us that, or it's the sort of stereotypical lawyer scenario, isn't it? And so I think we can become too bogged down in, well, we've got to, what do they do with their data? Well, when the answer comes back, do we really know, unless we're data specialists and GDPR specialists and you name it? Do we really know? We know what we're told we should be doing by our regulators and so on. So don't get too bogged down. Allow those organisations that you're liaising with, allow them to tell you what's important and why it's important and what they do and how they do manage things for you. I think, as well as Giles said, it's making sure that you've got a partner, making sure you've got a partner that you can work with and you're on the same level with. They're all going to want to, and they all understand your business. They all understand what lawyers do and how we work. So it could be same across the board, whether it's a firm of solicitors or otherwise, because what we have found in the past is that there are always salespeople, aren't there? And so the other thing I would suggest exploring is that if there's a provider that's worth their weight in gold, they haven't got a problem introducing you to the rest of the team to actually, when you're trialing it, work with those who you would be working with on an ongoing basis, not just those sales fronted, who are great and are really good at selling the product, selling the idea, and it all sounds rosy, but once they've it's implemented, and then the week after that you're left with actually those who are the technical ones. Make sure that that you can work with them, and the channels that you're going to go down and how you are going to progress. As Alex said, make sure that you've got a team, whether that's one person or whether it's a couple of people, who are right to move the product forward. It's an ongoing thing, isn't it? When the client needs something different, change the precedent or think about it. So but it doesn't need to be onerous, really.
No, and it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because the organisation does need to be prepared to listen and probably have some formal sort of feedback loops to listen to the customers and to take on board feedback. I think that's a really critical point, and the point you make about meeting the people throughout the organisation is another good one, and people should consider that. What I would add to that is that in today's world, you get a range of different solutions and different companies which can all connect together and integrate via API. And that's really, I think, in the legal tech area, just starting to come together, and you're going to start to get a community of providers who can work together to meet different needs in a specialized way across an organization. And so for an end client organization, they can look at that and say, okay, well, I've got needs in this area, this area, this area, and this area. And what we really want to do is to make sure that we've got solutions across all of those and that we put them in place over a period of time. And we're going to work with a variety of different providers to do that. The key aspect to that is making sure you have one version of the truth in terms of the data transition, so that you can get all those different systems talking to each other, and you're not bogging yourself down in a whole lot of rekeying and a whole lot of kind of inefficient processes and things. Giles, I saw you nodding there a lot to a lot of the conversation from Alex and Sophie. If I get you to comment on that, and also just to start thinking about, in your experience with Avoca, how some firms have gone about implementing document automation systems.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that was just said. One of the particular things I want to sort of focus on is, whilst it's important not to get bogged down between the tools, I think it's also really important to ask the difficult questions. Ask people about, ask the provider, how do you expect to make money from us? Are you going to charge just loads of professional services fees? Or what's your monthly subscription model? Can we have a discount? How does this? Ask for a free trial of the product and actually try it while they're not watching you use it, because the supplier could easily be hiding issues with the product from you. If someone's confident in their product, they'll let you have a free trial, and if they don't, I'm not sure that's someone you necessarily want to be dealing with. Equally, if they're not transparent with you on, the reason I nodded when you talked about APIs is you want your supplier to be transparent with you on integrations as well. I talk about emulating your existing processes. If you can't use an API and connect whatever document automation tool to what you already do in terms of systems, that means people have to change more of what they do, and people hate doing that, as we've discussed. I think another thing as well is defining success really clearly before you go into a project with them. So be really, really candid about the things that you want to achieve, what you think success will look like. Be really concrete about it. Ask things like in your demos, what are the biggest issues with your platform? What are the biggest drawbacks for someone like me? How are you different from your competitors? Are there any questions that I should have asked, but that occur to you based on what my business does? And if they're giving you good answers to that kind of thing, they're all really good indicators. And I think related to this, I would always recommend doing a proof of concept or a pilot with a document automation provider, whether that be a tech provider or otherwise, and just getting them to demonstrate to you that their product can do what you want it to do, and actually working with them is going to be good. I think another thing I really resonated that you talked about, Sophie, was getting them to show you that people who actually do the work, because again, linked to what Alex was saying about the irreducible kind of difficulty with actually looking at your contractual mechanics and making sure you put the automation in the right places in a rigorous way. But because of that, even with the best, most user-friendly tool, you're going to want a degree of collaboration with the people who are providing that tool. And frankly, if they don't reply to your emails and they don't show you the technical people, and those technical people aren't nice and normal and understanding people, it's just going to make your life a bit miserable. So yeah, see behind the curtain, and a pilot is a really great way to do that. The other thing I would say as well is, I would completely agree with what you say about rigor, Alex. A lot of people say to me, well, why are we doing document automation? That means our trainees or our juniors aren't going to get enough training on how to sort of do contract drafting. I often say, actually, creating automation on a document is one of the most rigorous things you can do from a contractual interpretation perspective. But that's a little tidbit I thought I'd mention as well.
Yeah, well said. Sophie, I see you nodding, and of course you referenced this before, didn't you, in terms of different people coming in with not a lot of experience in using document automation firms or systems. So what's your view of that?
Yeah, I think there's this panic over, well, we've always drafted contracts in this particular way, we've always drafted wills or documents in this way, and we've been to law school and we've done it in this particular way. How is anybody coming on board? How are we going to possibly train people if it's just a tick box? Well, it's far from just a tick box. And actually, again, with the right products and systems in place, it's really valuable for junior members of the team who are either retraining into your area of the law, or it doesn't even need to be, actually the legal technical side. It's just generally from a compliance point of view. How are we going to get anybody to understand what they have? File opening, automation of file opening, for example. Well, as long as the right questions are there, the training doesn't go away. There's other things that then you look at internally as to how you make sure that those measures are put in place to make sure those individuals are getting the right training. But guess what? That can be done as part of the systems you're using as well. And you can work with the teams that you're having to make sure that those checks are in place. So from our point of view, within our practice, what has been brilliant by the automation process of having trainees, in my example, is the fact that they all learn differently. And throughout this period where we haven't all been together in one room, their learning has had to be very different. They haven't been able to sit in on meetings with me learning, or the members of the team. They've had to adapt, and that's had to come through different delivery of training, and for them to seek to look to develop in different ways. So the automation we're using absolutely helps with that. So it's not only the end user with the client from my perspective, but also internally with trainees. It's been really valuable.
Well, one of the things I'm interested in here is that to get started, I think a lot of organisations probably just need to start thinking about their inefficiencies, and I'm kind of interested in your collective views on this, because that to me would be a great starting point. Even if you didn't have the plan, just make a list of where you think you're wasting time. And Sophie, in one of the earlier questions, was very clear about the fact that they were very aware that they had saved themselves thousands and thousands of pounds by putting in place a document automation system. So Alex, coming to you, what would you say would be the success metrics for document automation working well within different organizations?
Well, it's interesting you said about waste and so on, because the large portion of the legal industry make a lot of money out of waste, right? So the elephant in the room here is that if you don't get the incentives right, it's not going to happen. And guess what? There's been a very low take-up of document automation in the legal industry because the billable hour. So the starting point, I think, is you kind of got to get your pricing model right in order to be worth doing this, right? So so if I'm guessing wildly, you're charging a fixed fee for wills, right? So that's something to think about. In terms of success, you're going to be starting, if you're in-house, with the most common contracts, right? So I would simply look at adoption levels of what proportion of your contracts were created automatically is probably as good a metric as any. That for anyone that is automated, you'll be saving time, and it'll get you to focus on the most common ones, which is kind of where you should be focusing anyway. There's kind of a sweet spot between volume and complexity, where you want kind of medium level complexity. High volume is like where you're going to get the best bang for your bucks with this. So that's what I do. In terms of how to go about it, just one other thought is someone once said that lawyers are the kind of people that would look at a tree with a broken twig and declare the tree to be broken. We are quite a difficult cohort in terms of how we manage our skepticism, our natural skepticism, and it is, in addition to the billable hour, another wonderful way in which these kind of activities can get killed fast. I would very much start with a kind of a championship model of finding the keen people in your team who are excited about this kind of stuff, getting them to run with it, get them. They'll also have a much higher tolerance for things not quite being right. They'll tend to focus on potential rather than actual right now, which is very helpful at the beginning. I'd then kind of take the people in the middle, the broader mass, and start rolling it out with them and getting them to give feedback. So you knock the edges off, and then I wouldn't bother with the late adopters till way down the line, right? I mean, personally, I'd shoot them all, but I don't always get to do that. So you pick them up at the very end. But the key is don't let them anywhere near it until the very end,
yes,
because they'll just suck all the energy out of the process.
As I say, take it to a corner and strangle it. So yeah, we've seen that happen in the past. Look, we're running pretty well to schedule, so which is well done by all of us. Let's see what we can do in the next 10 minutes. By way of a wrap up, Giles, I'm going to come to you first. What would be 1, 2, 3 pieces of key advice you'd give to the participants in this webinar in and around document automation?
I think there's probably 2 bits of advice I'd give, which are pretty straightforward, and I think they're heavily linked to the stuff that we've already discussed. I would say identify someone or a group of people who can, champion the project, and make sure that you protect them. So in the context of a private practice law firm, you need to make sure that they're not just costing themselves their bonus by helping you on the project, because they're not doing as many billable hours, and you need to be really serious about making sure that they're properly incentivized, and that they're also empowered to bring other people into the process as well, because otherwise, it becomes a charitable thing for them to do for the organization, and that won't help you. The other thing I would say is also be very reasonable about the expectations you put on your change makers as well. So don't give them a tool or an initial task or definition of success, which is going to require them to, spend every waking hour doing the particular task that you're setting. So that can encompass various decisions around which tool you go for. Make sure you go for one which is sort of as low energy and straightforward as possible. It can be around making sure that they have enough funding to get the most out of whatever tool that they choose, and also setting a sort of relatively low threshold for what they need to achieve first off, and giving them a reasonable timeline for doing that. I mean, it all sounds super straightforward, but you'd be surprised how often that doesn't happen, and the person who's running these kind of projects ends up having to become a bit of a martyr.
Yeah. Great point about the billables too. Yeah, absolutely take that on board. Sophie, what would your advice be?
It's emphasis on everything we've said today. Listening to those people around you who are doing the work. Very often, the people to make the decisions about implementing something like this, aren't necessarily. I'm sorry if I'm stereotyping this, but aren't always those who are actually in the thick of it, doing the work. Dealing with the clients, dealing with the processes. So listen, what would make their job a lot easier? What's important to them? That can help maybe focus minds on what parts of the process they need to look at sooner rather than later. Look at reasons why people have maybe left your organisation. What were their frustrations? What was going on with that? What exit interviews, that sort of thing. What was the reason? Is there something you need to learn from that rather than just going through these motions? Really take it on. I appreciate a lot of that becomes to the ethos of firms and those that are leading the firms, but really grab the bull by the horns. You've got to get your facts right as to how this is actually going to help. That, Charles, the key phrase of the billable hours and looking at that, but actually, set out the plan. How is it? Have an example of actually, if I can do this in this way, it's going to save me alone, half an hour of time on that one particular. Okay, add that up, turn that into the figures. And if you're an individual in an organisation that wants to try and push for this type of processing, really show why it's so important and show it from a financial aspect at the end of the day.
Yes, nothing like that to get the partners across the idea. You need to have that ROI, don't you? So, and it'll be different for every firm. Absolutely. Alex, last word to you on the last few pieces of advice.
Okay, so just move fast. We have a basic rule at Radiant. If a project takes more than 2 weeks, you're doing something wrong. So we just get something up, get a system up and running, and get your first template up and running, and just get it out there being used, because you have no idea until it's actually being used quite what the real points are, quite what the data you need and so on is. So just get going, right? The second is, sorry, Dave and Giles, there are interesting open source options out there. Go and have a look at Docassemble. We're a big fan of it. And we've integrated, we actually gave away an open source integration with DocuSign and so on. So there is a possibility there. It is not as nice to edit and all the rest of it, but it's super powerful. And the third one is keep the data. You'll be surprised how much gold there is in there. And you know, we're basically living in a world which is far too much document centric and needs to become more data centric. And this is a core starting point as you try to move your contracting into a more data centric world.
Yeah. Absolutely with you on all of that. So thank you for your thoughts there, particularly the data piece. I think that's really, really critical. But the points raised by everybody there, I'm sure, are going to be very, very helpful to all of the participants in this webinar. Well, look, we are now at the close of the webinar, so we are going to go to questions and answers. But just before we do that, I'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of the panelists here in the discussion. You come from different perspectives, and we've, I think, explored some great ground across all sorts of different organisations, and I'm sure that the participants would have been able to take a lot away from that. So thank you to you all. Now, in the background is Pippa Shepherd, who's actually a board member of UKLTA, and I'm lucky enough to have her as my head of customer engagement. I should have introduced you earlier on, Pippa. My apologies for that. Well, what questions do we have for the panelists?
Yeah, thank you. We just have a couple of questions there for you. Looking at sort of like migrations with systems, is it better to go for a specialist system with each in different area of the law firm, or is it better to look at a generalist system that touches on everything?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to answer that one first. My view is a little bit of both, depending on your firm, because there'll be room for specialized systems and there'll be room for generalized systems. And what you'll find is that there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and it will really depend on where the biggest pain points are, the inefficiencies are in terms of the unique makeup of your firm. What I would say is that specialized systems will give you that deep dive, all of the risk management and everything that you need to deliver a very high quality outcome with very low maintenance, as opposed to more generic systems, particularly word-based systems, which then are higher maintenance. But that's my perspective coming from the lane that we're in. Giles, what's your answer to that question?
Well, probably the inverse. Actually, I mean, I think where you're doing sort of document automation, one of the really valuable things you can do now, especially let's say you're sort of a sales organization or something. If you do all of your document automation sort of online across all of your different contracts, what's quite handy about it is, by design, by isolating the key variables within your agreements, you're also extracting the key data from all of your commercial arrangements, and actually where you negotiate online as well, you're capturing all of the negotiation history of your on your agreements. So that can be really helpful if you run searches on that over time, to either complete due diligence exercises or to find insights on where you're getting pushback and how you can be able to amend your precedents going forward, and also frankly who your best negotiators are. That said, there definitely are some specialist applications of these softwares which work better, but I suppose I'm going to be biased because of the types of applications people come to for us for.
Of course, yeah, we're all coming at it from different perspectives, aren't we? Now, before I come to you, Alex and Sophie, on that particular question, I'm just going to check in with Pippa. Are there any other questions, Pippa?
Just one more about ROI, but yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, look, why don't we come to you, Alex? So what would you say to the first question in and around specialized versus generalized systems, and why somebody should?
We prefer specialized, just because we're comfortable integrating stuff, but I think there's a lot of value in generalized systems. And if you have a generalized system, you're less likely to use it everywhere. So you'll have it in this class, in-house going, you'll have this class of contracts and so on, but it won't be for consumer-facing contracts or anything else. So it's a playoff, but yeah.
Sophie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, again, it's a really difficult one, isn't it, to try and implement something across the board, particularly in a larger practice. And I think it's making sure that everybody understands, or that, you know, the heads of each department understand how it's going to impact their area and what perhaps is available on top of that for their own work that they do if they're having quite a general approach. I think sometimes the expectations aren't always managed there. Again, maybe that comes back from a sales perspective, but expectations aren't managed to make sure, as Giles said earlier, asking the questions about how it affects, you know, if it's an overall software you're looking at, how is it affecting what I do with wills, how does it affect what, you know, commercial do with what they need to draft and so on, what can be built on. So
fantastic. Well, look, do you think we've got time for one more? We're right on the dot of 60 minutes, but we've got a question about ROI. If the panelists are around for another question.
There is another question that's just come in as well, which is saying, what are the most suitable documents to automate, and where have you in law firms had the most issues in their experience? The question around ROI was about how do you start putting one together in order to get sort of like more senior people in the law firm to listen to it.
Sophie, can I come to you on the ROI question? You've been there, you've implemented, you've gone through that journey. What would your advice be?
I think just call on the experts to help you with the process. It's really not onerous. I think just making sure that you've checked out who you're using, put the responsibility back on those providers to show you how the system should be working, what should be doing, making sure that there's regular check-ins. So once you've implemented it, actually from day one, you know, there's regular contact there to make sure that, you know, it's all too well and good just to implement something and then get comfortable with it fairly quickly. Great, that's good, but then actually what else can it do? And so there needs to be, I've said it before, and you know, it's my emphasis, is that two-way relationship really for implementing something.
Giles, something to add there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's my sort of American half of my citizenship coming through, but I think it's an interesting conversation to sort of also put on the provider a bit to an extent. Say, you know, how are you going to save me money or make me more money? You know, and you know, as long as you're providing them enough information about what you do day in, day out, and so maybe some statistics around how long things typically take you to draft, they should be able to tell you and help you build that business case. Yeah, and I think that yeah, again, it's a case of identifying which of your agreements have the most sort of placeholder or sort of easily customizable information that you know select in a repetitive way at the moment. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think NDAs are an obvious one because you've got a high volume of those that most organizations do, but actually how long does it usually take you to draft an NDA? Usually not very long. So by the time you've opened up an application and done that, you might not actually be saving that much time. So yeah, I think the sort of sweet spot that I think Alex you just mentioned is a good one. Think about the ones which, you know, because for example for a facility agreement, you might still have to do quite a bit of bespoking as well. So sometimes the answer is also to automate a document 80% of the way. To not automate the whole document is another comment I'd make.
Yeah, Alex, last views.
ROI. I'd start with incentives.
ROI.
So, I think, you know, if you're an in-house team, it can be relatively easy to show that you're going to save X amount of money per document. But if you're a law firm, it's fundamentally harder, right? And although law firms are starting to do it, one, because people moving across from other firms going, what the hell, you're in the Stone Ages, my last place we did it, why aren't you doing it? And kind of shaming them into it. But, you know, they make arguments about accuracy and so on, and, you know, best stuff for the staff. But the fundamental issue is you're charging by the hour, you're going to charge less having spent money on the system. Right? And that kind of goes to the heart of the brokenness of the legal industry.
Yeah, and look, I just to pick up on a couple of other points that have been mentioned throughout the webinar, I think it does go to how people bill their customers and the sort of services that they're providing. Is it a flat fee? Is it on an hourly basis? How are different organisations engaging with their customers? And that then comes back to success, doesn't it? And how they measure the efficiency of something like a document automation system. But one of the things I will point out is, and it's a bit of a thumbs up for Giles' website, which is Avoca. They've got a great calculator on their homepage, which is pretty useful. You can sort of slide scales on it, and it will give you some sort of idea as to what the efficiencies could be. So Giles, bit of a plug for you there, mate. I quite like that. I thought that was very, very useful. So do check that out. Do you just want to give people your web address, Giles?
Absolutely. So it's avoca.com, and it's for the dyslexic people like me. It's quite a difficult spelling. So it's avvoka.com. Yeah, and yeah, the only other thing I mentioned as well is don't just focus on the money as well. Focus on employee happiness and retention as well, because actually indirectly, well, first off, that's a nice thing to do, but it also indirectly costs you money as well. So just picking up on what you said earlier, Sophie.
Wow. Well said. And risk management is another aspect to consider. You've really got to consider what the cost is to you of a challenge or some other form of risk that you're carrying all the way through the process. Look, we're going to wrap things up there. To the participants in this webinar, thank you so much for your attendance today. We hope that you've got something really useful out of the session today. And once again, to the panelists, Alex, Sophie and Giles, thank you. It's been absolutely fantastic to be having this discussion with you about document automation. I hope that we can do it again someday. I think that as we were going through this discussion, that there was clearly a discussion that needs to be had about the future of legal services and how they're delivered. So perhaps we'll all come together and have that sort of conversation as well. But to everybody else, a very good afternoon to you. This webinar will be available, so you can listen to it as a podcast. It'll be up on the UK LTA site or on the Arken site, and no doubt hosted on each of our individual sites as well. So good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance. Goodbye.